Good morning, seniors. How are you? This is the fourth recorded video. Are you ready for your quiz next week? To be on 22 April, inshallah. Okay. In today's session, you will learn the following points. You will define flower. You will be able to identify the structure of an idealized flower. An ideal flower, it means it has all of the different parts. So you should be able to label all of these parts and to know the function of each part, to compare between complete and incomplete flowers, to compare between perfect and imperfect flowers. Then, as an introduction for sexual reproduction in flowers, producing of seeds, you will learn the meaning of the term pollination and fertilization. In this session, we are going to compare between insect-pollinated flowers and wind-pollinated flowers, okay? For fertilization, we'll discuss it next week, inshallah. So let's start. If you remember, during the last session, we compared between two different plants that produce seeds, which are gymnosperms and angiosperms. Gymnosperms, they are cone-bearing plants that have cones instead of flowers. While angiosperms, if you remember, they are flowering plants. Plants, okay, that have flowers, so they have flowers, they have fruits. Seeds here are protected inside the flowers. Okay, so we are going to discuss today the structure of the flower. Let's first start with this video, which shows the four parts of flower, and also it shows in details the different parts that are found within the reproductive structures stamen and pistil. Let's start.
And that's pretty much it. Now we remember. Let's talk about the different parts of the carpel and the stamen, and we'll see how to remember them as well. So in a previous video, we spoke about the four major parts of the flower, and we also saw what they do. We also saw unisexual and bisexual flowers. If you need more details on that.
The four major parts are, the first part, look here to these leafy green structures, okay? These are the outermost parts, okay? The four parts of flower, they are arranged like in rings, circles. So the outermost one, it is the sepal, okay? The plural sepals. The function of sepals that they protect the young bud, okay? Imagine this flower as a closed flower, okay, having a bud, so it will protect the young bud. Now the second part, this colorful part of the flower, okay, which is the petals. The petals. The function of petals, it attract insects. So there are four main parts. The first one, the sepals, these greeny leaf structures, the outermost one. The second one, the petals that attract insects. Still there are two more parts. Male reproductive part, can you notice here this yellow rectangle? The whole part, it's known as stamen. It is made up of different parts. And in the center, we have the female reproductive parts. Okay, it is known as carpel or pistil. Okay.
You can go back and check out our video on flowers, unisexual and bisexual. Okay, so over here, let's only focus on the reproductive parts, the carpel and the stamen. So let me get rid of these others. All right, so let's start with the stamen. What are the different parts of the stamen that we can identify? So stamen can have two major parts. So the part below over here, which is like kind of like a wire, we call that the filament. This is the filament. And then the part on top of that, kind of like the head of the stamen, we call that the anther. Anther. And guess what? Anther produces something called the pollen grains. You may have heard of this. Pollen grains. These dotted things that I've drawn over here that you may be able to see, they are what pollen grains are. Sometimes these pollen grains, some flowers have these pollen grains to be very sticky. In such cases, when you touch them, they will stick to your hand, right? And it's inside these pollen grains where you will find the sperm cells. So the sperm cells of the flower are found inside the pollen grains. All right, let's do the female parts now. The female reproductive part, the carpel or the pistil, they can be further divided into three major parts. So the topmost part is called the stigma. The part below, it's a long structure over here, it's called the style. And this structure over here is what we call the ovary. It's inside the ovaries, you'll find these structures over here, which you can see, these seed-like structures. They're not seeds yet, but these seed-like structures, they are called ovules. And guess what? It's inside these ovules, you will find the egg cells. All right, so again, let me just write that over here. The egg cells are found inside these ovules. So if you have more than one ovules, if a flower has more than one ovules, as you can see over here, each ovule will have an egg cell. And so you can kind of see now how far away the sperm cells are from the egg cells. For reproduction to happen, they have to fuse. And so one of the first steps of reproduction is the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther onto the stigma. And from there, the sperms will have to find a way to reach the sperm cells, sorry, the egg cells. But of course, that's going to happen in the future videos. This transfer is what we call the pollination, right? And we'll see in the future videos how bees and other insects play an important role in this pollination feature. Anyways, these are the important parts of the stamen and the carpel. Now comes the big question, how do we remember this? So to remember this, I want you to look at this picture. Trust me, this weird picture will help you, okay? So this middle part is the female reproductive part. Let's see how this helps me to remember. Bottom, I've drawn an egg. Egg reminds me of the ovary. That's like the easiest part for me to remember. So the egg is the ovary. On top of the egg, there is a tile. This is a tile. Tile rhymes with style. So this is how I remember style. Again, I knew the word style. I just had to remember where does style go, and this style helps me remember. And then on top of that, what is the symbol? This is the symbol of sigma. Sigma reminds me of stigma. Okay? So if I ever get confused, hey, which is stigma? Oh, this is the stigma. Sigma, stigma. Okay, and you can see they're balancing on top of each other, and the stigma is about to fall. It's going to fall on the car. Car, fall, car, fell, carpel. That's carpel for me. So the whole thing is carpel. Okay, let's go to the male part. What have I drawn? Why do I have drawn bulbs? Because I know there's a filament, and filament reminds me of the filament of the bulb, and that's how I remember, this is the filament. And what is it on the top of that filament? I see ants, but not just any ants. I see these beautiful female ants
with a long
and
hair.
her,
Anther.
and her. So again, I know anther, but then the moment I hear anther, if I remember this picture, I know how anthers are over here, the top part of the male reproductive part. And we know what these anthers are saying. The female ants are telling all the male ants, stay there, men, stay there, men. So stamen. And that's pretty much it. Now we remember both the male reproductive part and the female reproductive part. And at first you might be wondering, how do I remember this weird picture? Well, the thing is, weird things are actually easier to remember because that's how our memory works. Our brains tend to hold on to weird information. So take a look at this picture a little bit and then you'll be able to do this. All right. So in fact, let me prove it to you. Now, I want you to pause the video, take a look at this picture and see.
I'm going to close the video. Okay, and let's go through our presentation. So as I told you, in the flower there are 4 basic parts: sepals, petals, stamens, and pistil, or there's another name, it is carpel. Let's start with the outermost one. They are arranged, okay, from outermost as rings to innermost. The outermost one, the sepals, and outermost green leaf-like structure that protects the flower while it is a bud. In this diagram here, for example, here we have one sepal. Okay, here is another one. And the next diagram, for example, these leafy green-like structures, they are the sepals. Okay, the second part, the petals, it is the outer structure that usually attract pollinators. What are pollinators? Different agents, insects, birds that carry pollens. Okay, so in this diagram, for example, these colorful orange, okay, structures are the petals. Here, the pink part, yes, shows petals. So petals, the outer structure that usually, because of the different color, okay, they attract pollinators. Stamens, stamen, look at men, okay, to remind you with what? With male, men, so male reproductive part. Stamen, the male reproductive structure that produce pollen. Here, these long and thin structures, okay, are stamens. The stamen is made up of 2 parts. This thin part, long and thin, that carries the anther, it is known the filament. So stamens, male reproductive structure that produce pollen. Each stamen consists of 2 parts. Filament, thread-like structure that carries up what? Carries the anther. What is the function of the anther? It's a pollen-producing sac. It contains what? The pollen grains. So pollen grains, they are found within, they are found here. Yes, okay? These pollen grains, they contain what? They contain sperms. The 4th part, the innermost part, is the female reproductive part, which is pistil, or it has another name. As I told you, it is called carpel. Pistil or carpel. They represent the female reproductive structure that contains what? Ovules. Inside the ovules, there are eggs. And we'll discuss this later on in details next week when you will learn double fertilization. Now, pistil or carpel is made up of 3 parts. The stigma, stigma, where pollen grain lands, style, this long tube here, through which sperm move down, okay? And at the bottom, the ovary, structures that contains ovules. These ovules actually will develop into seeds, yes? So later on, the ovary will form the fruit, and inside the fruit, these ovules, okay, will develop into seeds. So the pistil or carpel, it contains stigma, where pollen grain lands, style, a tube through which the sperm move down to ovary, and ovary structure that contains ovules, which will develop into seeds. The ovules will develop into seeds, okay? This diagram here shows all of the parts that we discussed within an idealized flower, okay? The 4 parts, the green leafy structures, the sepals, the colorful part that attract pollinators, petals, male reproductive, notice they are, okay, arranged from outermost to innermost, sepals, petals, then stamens made up of anther and, sorry, the anther here and the filament, and the innermost one, the female reproductive part, pistil, carpel, which is made up of stigma, the style, and the ovary. Now, notice that we said that this is an idealized flower, okay? It has the 4 parts. Actually, we can divide flowers into complete flowers and incomplete flowers. From its name, complete flowers. So these flowers have all the 4 basic parts of the flower. Have sepals, petals, sorry, stamens, and pistils or carpels. While incomplete, so they lack any one of the 4 basic parts. Any one of the 4 basic parts. Now we will compare, okay, between another 2 terms, perfect and imperfect flowers. Here, for example, in this diagram, the first one shows the 4 parts, sepals, petals, stamens, and pistil or carpel. Look at the next one, okay, the one to the right, sepals. Okay, they are in order. Start from the outermost, then petals, then stamen. Can you find the stamen here? No stamen. Okay, no stamen. So they lack male reproductive part. Okay, so the one to the left is a complete flower. The one to the right is incomplete flower. Now we have another 2 terms, which are perfect flower and imperfect flower. Perfect flower, it means that they have the 2 reproductive parts, the male reproductive part and the female reproductive part. The flowers have both stamens, male reproductive part, and pistils, the female reproductive part. Now, imperfect flowers, flowers that lack either stamens and pistils. Okay? It lacks one of the reproductive part, stamens or pistils. So, if you have a complete flower, it means that it's a must, this complete flower, since it's complete, so it has the 4 parts. So this flower has the 2 reproductive parts, stamen and pistil. So complete flowers are always what? Are always perfect flowers. Are always perfect flowers. But the opposite is not true. Perfect flowers, which means that these flowers, they have both stamen and pistils. It's not a must that they are complete flowers. Maybe the sepals, okay, are missing, are not there. They lack sepals. So it's not a must. If it is perfect, it doesn't mean that it is a complete flower. But if it is complete, it means, yes, 100% we should be sure that it is perfect flower also. Okay, so this is the first part, which is the different parts of flower, to identify the structure, to know their functions, to compare between complete and incomplete flowers, and to compare between perfect and imperfect flowers. Now, the second part of the lesson. As I told you, we will discuss here angiosperms, flowering plants. So seed formation, seed formed in what? In angiosperms and gymnosperms, in both of them. Angiosperms, flowering plants, and gymnosperms, cone-bearing plants. But here we are going to discuss seed formation in angiosperms, seed formation in flowering plants, okay? It involves two processes. The first one, it is known pollination, the first step, pollination. The second one is fertilization. Pollination, then fertilization, or as you will learn next week, double fertilization. I'm going to start with the first step, pollination. From its name, pollination. So it is related to what? To pollen, pollination. So immediately you have to remember what? Pollen. If we have here a female reproductive part, pistil, ovary style, and here we have the stigma. The ovules are here inside the ovaries, the ovary. And male reproductive part, filament and anther. Filament, this long thread-like structure, and the anther that has pollen. Pollination is when pollen lands on stigma. Pollen lands on a stigma. This is the meaning of pollination. Okay, now what will happen next? Double fertilization, we will discuss it later on. So pollination is when pollen lands on stigma, while fertilization, it is the union of the egg and sperm. The egg and sperm. Here, for example, the pollen that lands on stigma contains sperm. Inside the ovary, the ovules, they contains egg. When they unite together, okay, joining together, this is known as fertilization. So again, seed formation in angiosperms and flowering plants involves two processes, pollination followed with double fertilization. Okay, let's start with the comparison between wind-pollinated flowers and animal-pollinated flowers. Wind-pollinated flowers, wind, so simply, okay, how the pollen grains are transferred through what? Through the wind. While animal-pollinated flowers, it means that animals here, okay, will carry the pollen. Wind-pollinated flowers, they have like characteristics, okay? They have different characteristics, such as what? First of all, they are small, okay, to be carried through the wind. They are large, they will be heavy, so they cannot be carried, okay? They are small, no, usually they are small, so they will not attract animals or insects. So they are small. They lack bright colors. They lack strong odors. They lack nectars, okay? While animal-pollinated flowers, they are larger. They have colorful, colored petals, brightly colored petals. They have strong nectar. They have strong odors. They have specific shape. Why? To attract pollinators, to attract these animals, okay? So if we want to compare between insect-pollinated flowers and wind-pollinated flowers, as we said, according to the size, wind pollinated flowers, they are small in size, while insects, they are larger. Wind, they lack bright colors, while insects, they have beautiful, attractive petals. You can think of the nectar, the odors, okay, the color. Wind pollinated flowers, they lack all of these things, while insect pollinated flowers or animal pollinated flowers, they have. There are also other differences actually. For example, if you have a flower with this long stamen, okay? You have filament and anther. Look at the stamen, it is what? It is long. So if these are the petals, still the wind what? Can carry. The wind can carry the pollen, okay? But if we have this flower, these are the petals, and the stamens are short, okay? The anther is short, the filament, sorry, is short. So stamen in general is shorter than the petals. So they are like hidden inside. So the wind cannot carry the pollen. So sometimes from the diagram, you have to know whether it is an insect pollinated flower or wind pollinated flowers. Okay, what about the style? Okay, I'm going to use another color, for example, yellow. Here, again, notice it has a long style, so the stigma is exposed to wind. So it is what? Wind pollinated flowers. While in insect pollinated flowers, it's not a must. Maybe there will be like short style, and the stigma again is like inside. It is not exposed to wind. So it will be what? Animal pollinated flowers or insect pollinated flowers. Okay? So there are many differences between insect pollinated flowers and wind pollinated flowers. Insect pollinated flowers or animal, they are larger in size, brightly colored petals, they have strong nectar, strong odors, and specific shape, while wind pollinated flowers, small, they lack the bright colors, the strong odors, or the nectar. Okay, what about the, keep in your mind the shape also, the style, the stigma, whether it is exposed to wind or not, the stamen, whether it is long or short. Wind pollinated flowers, usually they have what? They have long stamen, okay? They have long style, so the stigma is exposed to the wind. This diagram here shows one example of wind pollinated flowers, dandelion, okay? Now, for animal pollinated flowers, there are actually different examples of animals that pollinate flowers, such as, I'm going to start with insects. You have insects, hummingbirds, for example, bats. For insects, there are different examples, but 90% of the plants, okay, they are pollinated by bees, plus other insects, okay, such as moths and flies. Let's start with this video about pollinators. Let's go.
Are you sick of flipping pages to learn anatomy? Are you bored of uninspiring atlases and
They actually collect nectar for their own purposes, drawn by the fragrance and colour of the flowers. In the process, they transfer pollen from one flower to the stigma of another flower, helping the plants to
Plants
reproduce.
on stigma, this is pollination, this is fertilization.
The process is called pollination. And those who transport the pollen, pollinators. Pollination was originally carried out by the wind. But in the process of evolution, insects and animals have increasingly taken over. Their work is important.
So not only through wind, but
75% of
also
crops, from cocoa beans to pumpkins, depend on
insects and
pollinators.
animals.
And if you include all flowering plants, it's nearly 90%. Bees are probably the best known pollinators and can be found
They are
all
best
over the
known
world.
pollinators.
But flies also transport pollen,
Flies also.
as do beetles,
first
moths,
pollinators,
ants, and
Bees,
butterflies.
then flies.
In tropical and subtropical regions, birds also help to pollinate, along with bats. They like flowers with strong-smelling slimy nectar. In Madagascar, the so-called traveller's tree is pollinated by lemurs. But the most important pollinators for farmers worldwide are insects. Domestic honeybees alone can't pollinate all the food crops. Wild pollinators are often more productive. In the case of the apple blossom, for example, a wild mason bee is 80 times more effective as a pollinator. But it's the insect diversity that best increases the yield. In the case of...
Okay, so as you watched in the video, what are pollinators? If you want to define pollinators, those who transfer what? Pollen. There are different insects, different animals that transfer pollen. Insects, okay, the best pollinator is what? Bees. Then flies, okay? Let's start with bees. They locate the flowers, first of all, by the scent, the odor, the smell. Then, according to color, and then the shape. They eat nectar, okay? The purpose is actually not pollination. They want to eat the nectar. While they are eating the nectar, they will collect pollen, okay? To feed their larvae and collect pollen. Now, the bee pollinate the flowers. They usually like which colors? They like flowers with the blue colors and yellow colors. These flowers, they have like guidelines, they have markings that show the location of the nectar. What about other insects? Moths, they feed at night. Since they feed at night, keep that in your mind, okay? That they will look for flowers with what? With white color. And they have to look to the scent, okay, the strong odor. They visit heavily scented white flowers that is easy to find at dim night. Flies, the second, okay, best pollinators after bees, pollinate flowers with certain smell, and usually it is not a nice smell, such as, for example, where you can notice the flies all the time, near the garbage or things with rotten smell, such as rotten meat. There are other examples of pollinators. Here, for example, hummingbirds. Look at this diagram, shows hummingbirds. Look at their beak, they have long beak. And what about the color of the flowers that they prefer? It's not a must, okay? But usually they will look like for flowers with red color. So hummingbirds usually pollinate red flowers with a specific shape. Why? To insert their long beak to collect the nectar. What about bats? Like moths, they will look for flowers with what? With white color. White flowers that open at night. Okay? In this way, we finish the second part, which is pollination. Next week, inshallah, we'll discuss the second step, okay, which is involved in seeds formation in angiosperms, double fertilization. Let's go through, okay, this diagram which shows the structure of flower. As I told you, that there are 4 different parts. The outermost one, which is sepal. So where is the sepal? It is here, correct? I'm going to use this green color to color it, yes? These are the sepals. Okay, what about the second part? The second part is the colorful, the attractive part for pollinators, which is petals. Let's use this red color to color the petals, and then to label it. These are the petals. The second part. Then, what is the third part? Male reproductive part, okay, which is known as stamen. I'm going to use this orange color, yes? So these are what? 1 minute. Here we have stamen. The long filament carries the anther, okay? So the upper part is the anther. The thread-like structure is the filament. Okay, the innermost part, which is the female reproductive part, carpel or pistil. I'm going to use the purple color, yes? So here we have the female ovary, style, and stigma. Stigma, where pollen lands. Style, where sperm will travel, okay, until it reaches to ovules. And inside, this is the ovary, the outer part. Inside the ovary, we have ovules, okay? Now, we have here, identify each part of the flower, describe below using the words in the word list. The female part of the flower, the female part, as you learned, carpel or pistil. Okay, a small plant that is just starting to grow after, okay, planting seeds. The seeds germinate. If you remember, the seed swells, seed coat splits, the root appears, then shoot appears. After that, there will be like a tiny small plant. This plant is known as seedling. The place where pollen develops and is stored in the male reproductive part, okay, where? On the anther. The female sex cells in a plant, okay, it is found within the ovary. occurs when the sperm and egg cells unite together, join together. This is what? Fertilization. A sugary substance that attracts insects. So the answer is nectar. The male sex cells in a plant, they are found within what? Within the pollen. The male part of a flower in general, the whole part, stamen. The stalk that supports the anther, it is the filament. The part of the pistil that receives the pollen, stigma. Protective leaf-like enclosures for the flower bud, the outermost one, sepals. The ripened ovary of a plant that contains seeds, fruit, and you will learn this next week. Flower that contains both male and female parts, they are perfect flowers. Flowers that lacks either male or female, they are imperfect flowers. The last part, the structures that make up the outside of the flower and may be colored or contain nectar or perfume glands, these are the petals. The last slide here has different questions, okay? The first question, the difference between self-pollination and cross-pollination. Actually, you learn this in term 2. Self-pollination, it means that it is happening within the same plant. So, okay, within the same flower. So they contains both male and female reproductive part. While cross-pollination from one plant to another plant, okay? So from one male reproductive parts from one plant, female reproductive parts in another plant. The difference between complete and incomplete, not perfect and imperfect. Perfect and imperfect, you have to think of the reproductive structures, male and female. Complete and incomplete, it means in general. Complete, they have the 4 parts. Incomplete, lack one of these parts. Does an incomplete flower may consider as a perfect? It is incomplete, okay? Incomplete. Incomplete, it means it's lack one of the 4 parts. May considered as perfect flower. Okay, perfect flower, it means it contains both male reproductive and female, stamen and pistil. But the incomplete, it may lack any of the 4 parts. So yes, maybe it's a perfect flower. Maybe this flower has both stamen and pistils, but it lacks one of the other 2 parts. So the answer is yes. Does a perfect flower may considered as incomplete? It is the same, by the way. Perfect flower, so it has what? Both male and female. May considered as incomplete? Yes, because maybe the other parts are missing. Okay, in this way, I explained for you the materials required, okay, for your first quiz. You have to revise the materials that we covered within the first 4 weeks, okay? Next week, inshallah, we'll start the second process, okay, in seed formation for angiosperms, which is double fertilization. Stay home, our lovely seniors. Stay safe, take care of yourself, and bye-bye. I'm going to end the session now. Yes.
ماما خلصت. ماما خلصت الدراسة. وخلصت تدرسهم. وانت خلصتي حصتك؟